In this video, we will discuss user customization, configuration, default setting menu. In this menu, you can set the general settings related to format, which is applicable to the entire ERP company code of yours. In General Default Settings section, firstly, you can set the font of your company code. You can change the font of the text displayed in your company code, and the size and style and color. And for example, if you change the font to this, then your ERP company code will be displayed in that font. And as you change the settings, you can view the preview at the bottom. And next, in Sort By section, you can set the default way of alignment for each type of field, like numeric type, date type, and title subtotal, and others. You can align left, right, or center, and so forth. And moving on, you can set the number format of numeric type fields. Click a field, and then you can set the default decimal places for each numeric type field, such as amount, base quantity, auxiliary quantity, inventory price, and text included price, and percentage, numeric type fields, and payroll amount. And once you have set the default decimal places here for each field, then in various template setup screen, for a numeric type field, if you check default option, then the settings that you set through default setting menu will apply to this field. And also the default setting will apply to menus where you have not set any additional template and which remain as the initial state. So for example, I will set the amount decimal places to 2 places. And then I will go to a report, Accounting 1, Reports, Cash Flow Report. Here I have not set any template, and if you click search, then the amount will be displayed in 2 decimal places based on the user customization default setting. And if you change the setting to 1 place, and if you search again, then it'll appear in 1 decimal place. So in this way, please set decimal places for each numeric field from amount to quantity, price, percentage, and so forth. And next, you can set the format for the numbers that have decimal places and various other display format for numeric values. For example, you can set whether to display 0 or not if the value is 0, whether you will make it blank or whether you will fill in the 0. And you can set whether to add a 0 at the end of each decimal place. And you can select thousands separator symbol and decimal separator symbol as well. And next, you can set date and time field. This setting is related to both input menus and printouts and list screens. So for example, in sales list menu, if you click on a slip and find the slip history, you will see date and time, and you can set the display format of this time in default setting date and time section. You can set whether to display day of the week in short form. You can check or uncheck. And you can set the display order of date, day, and time by drag and drop. And you can set the symbol that you will insert between each field. And you can set whether to insert space between each column. And you can view the preview at the bottom while you set the settings. So please note. And you can set the hours format of your company code between 24 hours or 12 hours. And you can set the position of AM, PM when you display time. Next, you can find formless reports. This setting is related to the printouts of inventory sales or purchases module. If a menu of these two modules lack template setup function, then the default decimal places setting of default setting formless reports will appear. So set the settings for those menus. And next, you can find partition setup. Partition setup is a function that is available in template setup, like input screen setting or list template setup and so forth. And you can set between partition 1, 2, 3, 4, which means whether you will sort input fields in one column, in two columns, in three columns, or in 4 columns. And for each number of partitions, you can set the width of each field title and data input field. You can input a value, or you can drag and drop. And then the setting will apply to each individual menu's template setup. And so far we have discussed general default setting, and we will move on to input default setting. Firstly, you can set the rounding method applicable for pre-tax amount, tax, and payroll amount. You can choose between round, round down, or round up. And in date and time field, you can set the format of date and time, which is applicable to not printouts, but related to data input. For example, in new sales menu, the date format is being displayed as the format set in default setting menu, March, date, comma, and year. And you can edit the display format if you want. You can change the display type and insert symbols between each column and insert spaces between them. So let's see an example. If you change the format to 2 digits for both month and day, and instead of comma, if you insert a hyphen in front of year and remove the spaces, then the preview will display the format that will be set after you click save. And then if you go to new sales and refresh the menu, then the date format will change to the format that you set in default setting menu. So please use this setting for input screens. And use the time format setup in the same way. And moving on, we have finished discussing about input default setting, and we will discuss printouts default setting. And most printouts have their individual template setup. And before editing the individual settings, the default setting of user customization will apply, and you can set the default settings here. To begin with, you can find subtotal and total setup. For example, in inventory 1 sales order status, if you click search, you can find subtotal value and total value. And you can set the default settings for whether to display subtotal or total at all in user customization numeric type field setup. You can check display or not display. And once you have set up these settings, then these settings will apply to each menu's template setup default value. For example, in sales order status again, if you add a new template, and click on a numeric type field like quantity and click setup, then in display form, if you click default option, then the settings of user customization will apply to this numeric type field. And in addition to display format, in total subtotal total field, if you click setup and check default option, then the settings of print default setting numeric type field subtotal total settings will apply to this subtotal total setup. So please note that for the settings for the general ERP code, please use user customization default setting. And for an individual setting of a particular printout, please go to each template setup and click total subtotal setup and click set manually option and edit the individual setting. And moving on, you can find image size setup. So this size setting is applicable to item setup, register image function. If you click on an item code and go to item info tab, then in image field you can pull an image from groupware image storage and register the image for this item code. And once you have registered images for each item code, you can view including item images like this. And the default size of the images printed in printouts will be decided by user customization settings. And moving on, for printouts and list menus, you can set the date and time format. This setting is applicable for printouts and list menus. So for example, if you replace the slashes with hyphen and save, then in menus like sales list, if you refresh, then the printed date format will change from slash to hyphens. So please use these settings for the menus that display numbers and dates. And in the same way, select the display type for each column and insert symbols, insert spaces, and view the preview. And use the time format settings in the same way. And next, you can use print setup menu. So these are the default settings for printouts print setup. For example, when you print inventory invoices, if you click print button and go to template setup screen and go to print setup on the left, click settings, then the default option will follow the user customization default setting, print default setting, print setup, settings. And for individual setting, please check set manually and edit the settings. These are the settings for your paper printouts in hard copy, and whether to print one invoice in a sheet of paper or 2 invoices per page. And if you want to simply print out 2 copies, then you can just check print 2 copies option and then get 1 invoice yourself and give 1 invoice to your customer. But if you want to print them in one page, in a single page, then you can use 2 pages per page instead. And check print 1 copy. Then in 1 copy, 2 invoices will be printed out. And when you use 2 pages per sheet option, if you want to move the second invoice higher within the page, you can reduce the gap between dotted line and second page. And then the second invoice's position will be raised. And you can use reduce the page option to make the invoice smaller to fit the page. You can also select the default paper type and set the margins for top, bottom, left, right. For example, if you want to move the invoices higher and to the left, you can adjust the top and left margin to make the invoice go higher. Lastly, in Others section, you can find print order settings. This setting is applicable to when you print out multiple slips at once. You can set the order of printing out multiple slips and in descending or ascending order based on their slip date number. So if you select descending order, then the most recent slip will be printed out first,